Good afternoon. I really felt like I needed to touch on some things we talked about in our message last Sunday. And I thought the best way to do that was to kind of convey it. I'm a better talker than I am a writer. Sometimes I try and write and it takes forever, and I'm just not very good at it. But I'd like to really zero in on something we talked about last Sunday in our Simplify to Simplify series, where we talk about overcoming things. And I just want to kind of nail it home. We read from Hebrews 11, and Hebrews 11 reads like this. Hebrews 11, 32 to 34. It says, "How much more do I need to say? It would take too long to recount the stories of the faith of Gideon and Barak and Samson and Jephthah and David and Samuel and all the prophets. By faith, these people overthrew kingdoms. They ruled with justice and received what God had promised them. They shut the mouths of lions. They quenched the flames of fire and escaped death by the edge of the sword." But the next two phrases are kind of what I want to zero in on. Their weakness was turned to strength, and they became strong in battle and put whole armies to flight. That's the New Living Translation. The English Standard Version says those words this way: "Who through faith conquered kingdoms and enforced justice and obtained promises, stopped the mouths of lions, quenched the power of fire, escaped the edge of the sword." Then it says, "Were made strong out of weakness, became mighty in war," and then put whole armies, foreign armies to flight. It would appear that, I said this one morning, it would appear that the kingdom of God is full of Frodo Baggins and Samwise Gamgees. Never seen the Lord of the Rings trilogy? There's these unsuspecting heroes, my favorite of which is Sam, who appear to be the weakest and most frail group of the Fellowship of the Ring, and somehow they're chosen to bear this burden and accomplish this impossible task, and literally see the list that happens, or they kind of are a part of. They escape the edge of the sword. They put whole armies to flight. It's just absolutely amazing what happens in their lives. And it would appear that with each passing step, they're becoming stronger, until at the very last part of the Lord of the Rings, the Return of the King movie, that you would see them take each step towards Mount Doom and to dispose of the ring, and it's just an incredible moment. It's like it was like they became strong through the process. They started out very weak, and then became strong through the process. For us as Christians, I think we have to be aware that many times things come at us, things go on, things happen, and we seem very weak, and we are very weak, and we are very frail. But it is that very battle, it's that very thing that helps us display the strength of our God. It's that very thing that God creates the character of Christ in us. It's that very thing that causes the glory of God to be unveiled, because we are very weak and we're not equal to the task of the battle. And so God's looking at us and saying, I can make something out of you. In 2 Corinthians 12, 8 through 10, God describes that through the Apostle Paul, because he has a messenger of Satan sent to buff and literally attack him and poke at him. And Paul writes these words in verse 8, "3 times I begged the Lord to take it away. Each time he said, 'My grace is all you need. My power works best in weakness.'" So Paul's response to that is, so now I'm glad to boast about my weaknesses, so that the power of Christ can work through me. That's why I take pleasure in my weaknesses and in the insults and hardships and persecutions and troubles that I suffer for Christ. For when I am weak, then I am strong. I think Paul's delineating a couple of different things here. He talks about weaknesses, and he talks about other things, insults and hardships and persecutions and troubles. So I think the weaknesses are the things that go on the inside. And there are some areas where we're just weak. On the inside, we struggle. On the inside, we have insecurity. We have leanings towards fleshly things and sin and weaknesses in our character, and those things eat at us and eat us. But there's also those battles we have to fight on the outside, those hardships, those insults, those persecutions. And in the midst of those, we can appear very weak. We need to handle things the way Paul did. It would appear that maybe how Paul handled some of that, he was being very weak. He should be able to tackle this flesh thing or this messenger of Satan, but he just wasn't able to. And there are many times he would talk about appearing weak in front of people in a couple of his epistles. And maybe the way he handled things, he appeared to be very, very weak and very frail. You know what? It makes me think of Jesus. Jesus' way of handling things are often not our ways. He tells us things like turn the other cheek, give your other. When somebody asks for your coat, give them your cloak. Also, when they compel you, which is not a good thing, they're forcing you. It's talking about it was common in Jesus' day for Roman soldiers to come and just grab somebody and make them carry their load. And Jesus is basically saying when you have something like that come against you and they compel you to go 1 mile, he said, walk with them another. And so that appears like a very weak response, but in Jesus' mind, it's compelling the work of the kingdom, the love of God. We can appear to be weak in our responses to situations. We may appear to be weak as we're dealing with sin issues, and we keep throwing ourselves at Christ. But in that moment, he's teaching us to rely more heavily on him and his grace than on our efforts and our energy. He's in those battles where we seem very weak and everything's coming at us. He's begging us. He's not really begging us. He's compelling us not to rely on our own talents and gifts to win the day. He's compelling us to rest in him and to see things turned around. We've got to be that. We can appear to be too weak in that, but when we're doing those kinds of things, we are heaping coals on people's heads. It is in those moments where we're praying for those who persecute us that we're most shining the glory of God. It's in those moments when we're offering forgiveness to those who persecute us, when we should have a right to respond in certain capacities, that God's being most seen and most heard. It reminds me of Jesus. There he is hanging on the cross, and he appears very weak. He's chosen not to say hardly anything in front of Pilate or even in front of the Sadducees and the Pharisees, the Sanhedrin. He's chosen to carry the cross, and even to a point of being so weak appearing that they have to ask somebody to carry his cross, and they take him up there, and he lays down. They put the nails and the thorns and all that on his head. And probably the most strength Jesus shows is probably that moment where he's hanging there and he's just ravaged by pain and by suffering, and he says, Father, forgive them. In that moment, he could have destroyed everybody standing there. And he chooses not to respond in the strength that man would respond in. He chooses to appear to be weak and show the strength of the love of God, the power of God. It's no wonder that Paul can say that neither death nor life, neither things present nor things come, that famine and pestilence and sword are nothing compared to the love of God, because Jesus displays that in what appears to be a weak human moment. The grace and the power and the strength of God is on display hanging on that cross. I don't know where you feel weak today. And I don't know what battles you're facing, and you may feel very weak, not enough for it. But can I encourage you about something? It's almost as if in those moments of our greatest weakness, it is that God's strength is most in play. It's when we're facing the most terrible battles that Jesus is growing us the most. God is growing us the most. So can I encourage you? Don't shy away from those. Don't try and faith around them. Faith your way through them. Be willing to endure the battle, and be willing to keep throwing the weakness at Christ and throw yourself over on his grace. Be willing to not do what everybody else would do and respond harshly and for your rights and all that. Choose to respond like Jesus and say, Father, forgive them. They don't know what they're doing. Be ready to do that. Then at that point, we'll probably most likely see more of the display of the glory of God, more of the grace of Jesus to be given away, more of the love of God experienced by those around us. And so let's endeavor to keep doing that. In your weakness, let the strength of God be shown. Become strong in battle, not by your own strength, but by the strength of Jesus. Let's endeavor to do that today. If we keep endeavoring to simplify, make what's important to Christ important to you, and let everything else fall down and fall away. You'll be glad you did. God will be glad you did. And those around you will be glad you did too. Don't be afraid to be weak so that Jesus can be shown to be strong.